This historical project that you had to put together, give us a little bit of background. Like, where did this project come from and what were you ultimately looking to achieve with this project in terms of affordable housing?
This project is located in International Falls, Minnesota. This was started in 1912. It was finished in 1914. And it was the school. In the 20s, the junior high was built on the other side of it. And when I was given the opportunity to actually go up and look at the building myself, I was totally in love. Looking at this beautiful masonry building, terrazzo floors, massive corridors, these beautiful wrought iron staircases that go all throughout. They have a library with the rolling ladders, just like Beauty and the Beast. They've got all the things. And to know that I was going to play a part in taking that from its state of devastation, all these things, that we were going to bring it and give it the gift of life again, to give her the chance to house families again and stories again. And classic American architecture, 14-foot ceilings, all the bells and whistles. They had the beautiful built-in casework, and it was a school for decades up until it closed. The community really rallied around that building to see how they could save it. And they did. And they were able to raise money for a roof. And then they were looking at options like, we want to save this building, but we don't know how. We don't have the capital. And thankfully, my predecessor had come in and started a conversation with the community about the building. And he walked inside, and the first thing he said, this needs to be housing. And taking a look at that process, I think it was from the start of the conversation to where we're sitting at today, it's like 8 years in the process. This was a LIHTC deal with state and federal historic credits. And the time that we were going through this, we went through the closing. We're like, just pumped up, and all of a sudden, bam, sunset on the state historic credits. So we were like panicking. We're like, oh no, like, what do we got to do? And thankfully, the state of Minnesota reinstated that historic credit. Okay, let's start construction. Let's do this. Was there pushback? Oh, yeah. Was there some NIMBY-ism? Yeah. But really, it came down to the power of community and partnership. And that is what it really takes, is that partnership.
How much did you guys anticipate that the whole project will cost to convert the building to housing?
I think our original budget was 14 when we were quoted. And I think at the end of the day, we were sitting at like around 18 million. But again, this was several years going back and forth before we were able to really kick it off the ground. And thankfully, we were able to pull it together and make it a wonderful project.
Okay, welcome to another episode of Affordable Housing and Real Estate Investing. Guys, today I'm so excited because Scarlet is one of the few folks that answer my messages on LinkedIn, and she blew my mind when she told me about her story and how she got into affordable housing, and most importantly, seeing her project come to life, most recently walking a new family into one of the homes that she helped put together. So I am so excited for this podcast. I'm looking forward to this for weeks. So Scarlet, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am doing so great, Kent. Thank you so much. This is a huge honor. I have been so excited about this. And thank you so much for reaching out. It's always good to be connected with other people that are passionate about housing.
Well, Scarlet, I think the honor is all mine because when I heard your story, I was most importantly touched to begin with. And just seeing your upbringing, the background that you had to go through, and the realization that you had, and using that fuel towards your career in affordable housing development is truly inspirational. I really want people to listen to your story and get inspired to come into this industry. So, Scarlet, let's start with your story. Like, who was Scarlet, and how did she even get into affordable housing in the first place?
That is the mystery. I am from northern Minnesota, and a lot of people will not know where this is, but I grew up in a place that's called Sugar Point. And where that is, it is west of a place called Federal Dam, and it actually is on the Leech Lake Indian Reservation. So my family and I, my mom, dad, myself, and my younger brother, we grew up in Sugar Point in a very small seasonal cabin. My dad was a carpenter, and they were renting this place, and he was able to make it year round. And when I say small, I mean small, like 850 square feet, no frills, no thrills, cast iron, old wood-fired like stove. We were poor, and I never really knew that. It was a fun way to grow up. I had my parents that loved me very much. I had a younger brother to pick on, play with, and it was great. And when I was about 5 or 6, my parents were able to acquire some land. I believe it was in tax forfeit, and they were able to get a used trailer house, like a 1976 trailer from Frontier Homes in Bemidji, and they moved that onto the 5 acres. And watching the land be cleared and watching this house come in, I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I'm on top of the world, right? And being able to run from like one end of the house to the other, and like cabinets and doors and closets and the whole 9 yards. I mean, I literally thought I was on top of the world until I got to school. That was one of those pivotal moments that stuck with me, where I realized that the stigma with housing is very real, and how you can be judged and how that can really impact your life. My first day of kindergarten, I was all decked out, and this was like 90, 91 maybe. It was a while ago. But my mom would take us shopping. We did a lot of like Goodwill, secondhand, hand-me-downs, this and that. Had my outfit all done up, and it came time for me to ride the bus home. And I was so excited. And as the bus pulled into our driveway, you could feel that there was this shift, and the bus kind of got quiet, and the bus parked. I got off. And I heard one person comment like, oh, trailer trash. So you live in a trailer. And I didn't really know what that meant. And I get off the bus, and my whole day just kind of changed. And I really had thought about that. And when it came time to have friends over, there was kind of a shift like, hey, Scarlet, you can come to our house, but my mom says I can't come to your house. And I never really understood what that was. And when I talked to my dad, he kind of filled me in on how you can be perceived by how you live and where you live. And I never really understood, because my parents were good people. They loved me. They worked. They did their best. And I was doing what I could. I was, tried to be nice to everybody, friendly. I did good in school. And I just really realized that people will really pass a judgment on you that quick for how you live. So that was something that always stuck with me. And it was kind of tough. And especially living where we did, a lot of my friends lived in similar situations, or at that time, what I called different. And I didn't really know that really we were all living in an extreme state of poverty. I had a lot of Native American friends that I thought were these big houses, right? Like they had an upstairs, they had a downstairs, they had like 4 bedrooms. And it was wild and crazy. But they also had aunts and uncles and grandparents living with them. And I always thought that was really cool growing up. And I thought how cool that would be if I could live with my cousins. But again, as I got older, I realized that was really the state of living here. And it was a lot to do with poverty and lack of opportunity. So looking at that and how it formed my life, like I said earlier, my dad was a carpenter. So he was always building these homes. And it really kind of stuck with me. Like, if he can do it, why are we looked at so differently because of where we lived and what they were able to afford? So that was kind of, my upbringing. And, as we got older and I got into my teenage years, my parents were finally able to buy a place in a place called Reamer, Minnesota. It was on 20 acres, and it was a cabin that somebody had, and my dad, added on to it. And I was like, oh yeah, now it's like a house we're big time in. And by the time they got the addition on, that's when my dad was diagnosed with cancer. So it was one of those things where, we had the house and we had the addition. It was beautiful. I think the total square footage was like 2,800 square feet, but then half finished. So I've always kind of been in this thing dealing with this stigma of how you're perceived by where you live, not necessarily how you live, but where, that instant judgment and that instant label that comes with it. And that's always kind of driven me and my passion to housing.
Scarlet, that is, first of all, thank you for doing such an amazing job telling the story of you and your parents. I mean, just from that story alone, I might have mentioned to you in the past, but one of the biggest battles that we have on this podcast has been dispelling the myths that those people in affordable housing, they're bad people, they're filled with guns, drugs, and drama, when you are a perfect example of coming from parents who are just extremely hardworking, doing their best to put food on a table and giving you a life that you can be proud of. Most importantly, for how hard your parents worked. And I can't thank you enough, because that helped me dispel so many of the myths associated with affordable housing. And it's so inspirational to see that, that story will raise you hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars easily, Scarlet. Just listening to you and how much that touched my heart, to be honest with you. And for you to use that as fuel, that's really, really beautiful. So maybe if I can frame this correctly, for kids out there right now that might not be coming from the best situations, and they also want to make an impact, how did you use that to fuel or enter into this industry of affordable housing?
Yeah. So like I was saying, my dad was a carpenter, and with us being in the early 90s, and my parents were older when they had my brother and I, and they had this really great lifestyle before they settled down and had kids. They got to travel, they got to experience all these things. And My dad had a really great history where he originally worked on the iron ore boats in the 70s or the late 60s. And then in the early 70s, that's how he got into construction. So he was able to travel across the West and even into Hawaii building these condos. And that's where he picked up that skill, but he never went to college. And then when he met my mom, she had kind of done the same thing, because they graduated in the late 60s, early 70s. There's a lot of opportunity and they just went wherever they wanted to go and they picked up a lot of skills, but neither one of them had a college education. So when they met each other later on in life, they settled down and had kids and they really had to look at themselves and be like, okay, now what? How do we provide? We have kids and we have needs. What do we do? And there was a decision made where my dad looked at my mom and he's like, you go. So my mom, she was in her mid-30s at that time, decided to work her way through school. So that left my dad taking care of my brother and I while she was working during the day, going to school at night. And she worked her way from a CNA to an EMT, an LPN, an RN, and a bachelor's of RN. And the sacrifice was, we were there with my dad and he was working construction, during the day, building houses. And at night, he was Mr. Mom. He was the dude. He was the guy. And I always looked at it and I'm like, I want to be my dad. I want to do what my dad does because he was known as this amazing carpenter and everybody knew his work because it was so great. And I looked at how he was able to do this with the passion and this innate knowing and the quality of what it was and how happy it made people to walk into their house knowing that it was everything that they wanted and that feeling that they got, that pride, that joy, that security, and that he was doing it because he loved it. Not because of the paycheck, but he actually loved it. So in my years going up, I wanted to be my dad. I know I have a picture of me in a little red hard hat when I was like 4. And how about I want to be my dad. Working with him a little bit through high school. In lieu of getting grounded, he said I could work with him to kind of work off my penance if I was out late or doing something I wasn't supposed to. I really learned a lot about the passion, the patience, the skill, and the drive for that. So I did that. And when we moved to Reamer and when my dad put on the addition to the house that they had bought, my brother and I both helped with that. And that was one of the coolest experiences. And throughout my life, being in different parts of the country and eventually moving back to Minnesota in 2011 to take care of my dad, prior to the years before his passing, I looked at all the work that he's done in all these homes and how people knew my dad's name and still having that passion to be my dad. And eventually after his passing, I was approached to manage a real estate office with a gentleman that I knew in Reamer. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to do sales. Real estate's not my shtick. I don't want to do it. I'm not a salesperson. I can't. And I got into real estate through that by being in the office. And there was a really remarkable woman named Barb Bertrand who she took one look at me and she's like, you need to be in real estate. I'm like, no, not going to happen. Not in sales. I don't want to sell people. I feel ugly. I feel dirty selling people. I can't do it. No. And she really pushed me over that edge. And she's like, you're not selling them. They're coming to you with a need. They want a house. And that's where I knew. I was like, maybe this is how I can be my dad, but in a different sense, instead of swinging a hammer, right? So when I jumped into real estate, that's where I really found my passion, to listen to people, to listen to their story, their needs, their dreams, and their vision, and to find them that missing piece. And I loved that. And I did that for several years before my own personal life changed, going through a divorce, looking at, okay, I'm a mom now. I have 3 kids. I've got to buckle down and make it on my own. And having real estate be at the whim of everybody else, I really had to think very heavily how I was going to make this life change happen and be possible. So with that, I kind of segued over into title and escrow. I did that for a while and I still got to be in that real estate realm and working with things and hearing the backgrounds of people like, this place has been in my family and all of that. And eventually had a better opportunity to move on to county assessment. And again, I had a fifth of Cass County as my area. So I'm constantly out talking with people about their homes and their values and what we need and hearing those stories. And just people and housing are just built into me. That is so my passion. I loved doing that. I loved working for the county. And then as life would have it again, I had to take a sharp readjustment with being divorced and raising kids. And I really had to make a big swing. And that's when I found development. And I went through the interview process and they hired me immediately. And when I got in and they talked about, this is what we want you to do, I'm like, this is where I fit. Now I can be on a big scale and not only be with people that are in housing that want something more, but be able to provide more housing that suits people, that allows them to live safely, freely, and within their means on a much larger scale. More than just one house at a time, but build big and do big things for a great, great cause. And it was that perfect combination when people are like, oh yeah, things fall apart before they fall together. It was literally that. I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing in my life? And then bam, development. And just with the organization that I'm with, it's a fantastic nonprofit, and leading the development department and being able to put up multifamily projects and work on some single family land trust homes, and use my real estate background, use my assessment and my title background, and just pour my passion into being able to help people have a home and have that sense of belonging and that sense of safe place is more than I could really ever ask for. So it's really cool to have it come full circle, where I grown up in limited means to helping those same people and those same families in the same spot that I was in over 30 years ago, have the opportunity to have a hand up, not a handout, but a hand up in those situations. It's really neat. It's really neat to see it come all the way around.
This is such an inspirational story. Audience, I told you you were going to love this story. And what I really want to pull out is, Scarlet, you just kept stacking your skills, from a realtor to an appraiser to working in the county assessor records. And all those steps were driven by your dedication to helping others. But really, I want people to listen to your story and take away is, you don't have to have it all figured out. You really don't. What Scarlett did was, she just knew that she wanted to go step in that direction. She wanted to help people on a massive scale. And she just kept acquiring the skills, because no one can ever take away the skills from you. You just keep stacking it. And when they like to say, the luck is when preparation meets the opportunity. Yep. When she got that opportunity, she took down that opportunity. She got into development. So for a game, this game of development that people think it's not a game for me, and I can never be that person that builds apartment buildings or whatever, Scarlett just completely proved you wrong. So Scarlett, I want to get a little bit more tactical here. When you started interviewing for your development position, and obviously you might not have had development experience before, how did you overcome people's doubts about you and your ability to take on a job? What can you kind of share with people? Because there's so many people out there right now, Scarlett, that wants to do good with their time and energy, but they're scared. They say, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
Help them out a little bit.
I go back to what my dad would tell me. Like, he was such an awesome character, and he gave the best advice. Even sometimes it was a little backwards. And I remember in the years that he was still alive, I'd be talking about like, oh, I don't know if I can do it. Like, I don't know if I'm qualified for this job or that job, because growing up the way we did, and living in a small community, you had service industry jobs, right? That was what was most available to you for a lot of first jobs. And my dad told me, he's like, if you can do service industry, you can do anything. And he would always tell me, he's like, there's no shame in saying I was looking for a job when I found this one. And looking at it like, you can always move on. With doing what I had to do after my dad's death, and of course after my divorce, and you totally rock your life, right? You don't plan for your flipping upside down, but it's built out of the necessity. Do you want to just survive? Do you want to sit there? Do you want to feel sorry for yourself, or do you want to take control? Because, every single person out there has survived 100% of their worst days so far, and that's on you. Right? You've taken that charge to survive 100% of your worst days. So I looked at it like, I have about 80% of what they're looking for. Let me prove that I can have the rest. I'm a fast learner. I'm visual. I'm passionate. I'm smart as a whip. I've got what you're looking for. Just take a chance on me. So I've had that mentality through everything that I've done. And my background is unique. And I've worked my way up through surviving and the necessity and the passion. And when I was interviewed for this development position, I was like, yeah, I got what they're looking for. I might be missing a couple things, but I know that I have what they're looking for if they just meet me. They're not going to find another person with enough passion and enough know-how and enough grit to be able to just meet all this. I've got it. I just got to make them see it. Part of that interview was kind of grueling. My former boss was interviewing me, And he's an incredible person, just absolutely incredible. And I remember one of the questions that they had asked me was, how would you navigate a 6-inch discrepancy in a LiDAR scan? And I'm like, And I thought about this, and I was, playing on my real estate and my title and escrow experience and working in construction with my dad every now and then. I'm like, I would have to wonder why I'd be working with that surveyor. And they busted out laughing. They're like, that's the silver bullet answer. I looked and I'm like, I will always be 100% candid with you. And it's so funny how that very question came full circle, because it was one of my first tasks when they hired me. I had to look at this specific LiDAR scan. I had to go through, I read the legals, I followed the callouts. I had to look at why there was this legit 6-inch discrepancy. And I took it to my boss and I'm like, it's right here. Here's why. And it was just so fantastic to be like, they knew that I had what it took and they knew that I could do it by the way that I answered. I wasn't going to just sugarcoat them and be like, oh, maybe it's this. It's like, no, I'd wonder why I was working with the surveyor. It shouldn't be like that.
Okay, so let's back up, because that was so technical that most people listening to it are like, Scarlet, what's a LiDAR scan? Why would the subject or the thought of working with the wrong surveyor come up in your head? Explain that a little bit.
Yeah. So when they prefaced this, I'm like, oh man. At that point, I had heard about LiDAR surveys, and I had only worked with, your meets and bounds or just regular surveys that you're looking at, like the drawing and the callouts and reading a legal, especially with real estate and title and escrow. I knew with LiDAR, which LiDAR is kind of like a 3D scan of a building. If there's a discrepancy somewhere, it's usually due to what's put in. Like if that legal had like a goofball quirk in it, or if they missed a wall or something like that, or if that surveyor hadn't had enough experience using that type of scan, there could be a little hiccup in the system and how that LiDAR was reading. So I kind of was thinking about this in my brain and just kind of visualizing this. And I'm like, well, that happens a lot on these big projects, but I'm looking, there shouldn't be that big of a discrepancy. And they had alluded to a couple other kind of surveyor questions in my grueling interview that I had. And I was like, I kind of question why I'm working with this person. That shouldn't be a thing and should be able to remedy that fairly easily. But if it keeps coming up, then I'm wondering if it's more of like a capacity issue or for like an experience issue. And when I answered the way that I did and saw the reaction that I got, they're like, yep, that's it. It's her. We got to have her.
And I think so many people, obviously that was a very technical question, but I have found that in development, even if you think about real estate in general, I rarely ever hear, oh, this project went on time, on budget, no issues, nothing at all. And that's just not the case. And at the end of the day, it really comes down to how you problem solve. And more importantly, how do you break down the problem? And in your situation, you might say, hey, people, or is it a process? Is it a technology? And you say, hey, let's start with the person first. Even if someone didn't know answer to that question, if you can show that you can apply a structure or a framework on how you might solve that problem consistently, then they know that you typically won't miss the big gaping holes. Now, obviously, the survey question, right? What would be the ramifications if there's a discrepancy? Or would you see like a loan get denied because, like, let's say you have a HUD loan for a multifamily? I mean, they require a change order for everything, for every little detail. So what would be the ramification if with this discrepancy? So just so people understand the issue here.
So with this, people might be like, well, LiDAR, that's odd. That's got to be in an existing building. And it was. So this question that they were asking me actually pertains to a project that I came on when I first started that's now leasing up, which is super exciting. But this was a building that was conjoined to another building that had to be legally separated, not physically separated, but legally separated. And both of these buildings are on the historic registry. So with this particular project being conjoined to another historic building, we had to legally separate that so it could be its own separate parcel and entity. And we had to make sure that it was following the right lines. So when we were doing renovations, we weren't blowing out the wrong wall or a part of a wrong wall or kind of really making bigger issues than necessary. So it was very, 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 very critical that we had our legal and our imaginary line follow the boundary perfectly. And like I said, that there was a little discrepancy there. So we had to figure out why, what was missed. Was it part of the adjacent building? building? Was there something that was missed entirely? What and where? So that's kind of where that comes, like, really, it really is important. And of course, with them both being historic buildings, our project that we're trying to legally separate had state and federal historic tax credits as well. So we had to really kind of navigate this carefully and make sure that everything that we had was correct, because we don't want to, like I say, you don't want to mess anything up. You don't want to say you have 6 inches more when you actually don't. That can be a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as if you were to own a single family lot and all of a sudden you were trying to decide where to put your fence up, you can't put your fence up 6 inches on your neighbor's land. And if I were to just draw a very simple single family analogy there, it's very important. 6 inches is a lot. It's your land or it's your neighbor's land. And obviously this was an imaginary line, but that makes a ton of sense. And you just teed it up for me perfectly, Scarlett. Honestly, like, I don't know how this conversation is feeling so smooth, but this is amazing. So let's talk about this deal, this historical project that you had to put together. Give us a little bit of background. Like, where did this project come from and what were you ultimately looking to achieve with this project in terms of affordable housing? Let's start there at a high level.
Yeah. So this project, I think, will always have a bit of my heart to it. I really do. Like I said, this was in motion when I came on into this position. Some of these questions that I now know why they were asking, but it's really incredible because this project is located in International Falls, Minnesota. And if you don't know, maybe you've heard of Rocky and Bullwinkle and the coldest place in the United States. I mean, but this was an amazing community who had this beautiful historic building that was a staple to the fabric of the community for well over a century. This was built between 1912. It started in 1912. It was finished in 1914. And it was the school, right? It was the school. In the 1920s, the junior high was built on the other side of it. And classic American architecture, 14-foot ceilings, all the bells and whistles. They had the beautiful built-in casework, and it was a school for decades, up until it closed. And that's when the building went vacant. The adjacent building, which was called Bacchus, that turned into a community center. And they looked at this beautiful masonry building who had just been a staple. It has a intense, like, mother energy to it. Like, you just feel so grounded when you're in that building. You feel safe, you feel secure, and you know that there's been so many souls and so much life and so much story and history that's passed through that building. And to see her sitting vacant for the amount of years that she was, the community really rallied around that building to see how they could save it. And they did. And they were able to raise money for a roof. And then they were looking at options like, we want to save this building, but we don't know how. We don't have the capital. We are International Falls. There's really nothing around us. So what do we do? And thankfully, my predecessor had come in and started a conversation with the community about the building. And he walked inside, and the first thing he said, this needs to be housing. And taking a look at that process, I think he told me it was from the start of the conversation to where we're sitting at today, it's like 8 years in the process. So when I say that housing takes a village, it truly does. The community there was so fantastic to work with because they loved this building. Everyone had a history, had a story, had a connection with this building. And was there pushback? Oh, yeah. Was there some NIMBY-ism? Yeah. But I mean, when in housing do you not face that? And that's where it takes the power of community. And we have a tremendous working relationship with the city, with the Bacchus Community Center and their board, and just the amazing amount of commitment that has gone in to make that project really take flight is something that's always near and dear to me. So when I was given the opportunity to actually go up and look at the building myself, I was gobsmacked. I was totally in love looking at this beautiful masonry building, terrazzo floors, massive corridors, these beautiful wrought iron staircases that go all throughout. They have a library with the rolling ladders, just like Beauty and the Beast. They've got all the things. And to know that I was going to play a part in taking that from its state of devastation. It had a hole in the roof for years before they replaced the roof. Some of that old hardwood floor had been buckled and warped and all these things, that we were going to bring it and give it the gift of life again, to give her the chance to house families again and stories again and life again. And looking at that process with the historic, this was a LIHTC deal with state and federal historic credits. And the time that we were going through this, we went through the closing, we're like, just pumped up, and all of a sudden, bam, sunset on the state historic credits. So we were like panicking. We're like, oh no, like, what do we got to do? And thankfully, the state of Minnesota reinstated that historic credit. And we were like, we're breathing a sigh of relief. Okay, let's start construction. Let's do this. And we had a fabulous architecture firm working with us. It was Urban Works Architecture. And they had actually done another school renovation in New Ulm. And that school was built by the same architect that designed our school in International Falls in that early 1900s. So it was very neat to see, but there were a lot of challenges. There were some setbacks here and there, but really it came down to the power of community and partnership. And that is what it really takes, is that partnership.
Wow. I mean, just to talk about a little bit of the challenges you have with NIMBY-ism, I mean, the passion that you and your team showed, that's the only way you can overcome all these oppositions there. Because you can fold over and bend over and just say, hey, look, they said no, and just take it as face value. But you guys didn't do that. You guys kept fighting, and now here you are. So for people that don't know much about development, right? Obviously, it started with that idea. You guys had that historical building, and you knew you wanted to turn it into housing. At a very high level, what were the steps that you had to take, right? Obviously, community engagement was one. Did you start doing like appraisals, market studies first, and then get some estimations of construction budget? What would be the typical process for people that are looking to, hey, maybe they have a historical building in their house? Like, what would the high level steps look like?
I've actually been asked this quite a bit, and I love this because in my ADHD squirrel brain, I go like everywhere, right? I'm like, oh, this, then, like everywhere. But it really starts with, to make anything possible, you got to have the political will, right? That's first and foremost. And one thing that's very interesting about rural northern Minnesota, where I'm at, is that if you look statistically, there's like I think I was reading this stat from the Blandin Foundation where they had put it out, where 1 in 37 people will have to serve in a capacity in a local government. So we have a lot of people that are just regular citizens serving in the capacity of local government, governing over taxes and tax base and levies and budgets and things like that, where the capacity is far less than what you would get, say, in the metro areas. So big decisions like this are not taken very lightly. So that takes a lot of conversation. It takes a lot of rapport, and it takes a lot of just being candid and being open and realizing, yes, I'm the developer, but I'm not trying to sell you on something. I'm not doing a bait and switch. I'm trying to do 3 times the workload, provide capacity, provide support, and then give you a development that you can be proud of, where you're increasing your tax base so you can lower your taxes, provide housing, the first new housing in a generation that you haven't had, and to meet your need, right? So you have to have that political will. And then also in development, depending on what sort of mechanisms that you're utilizing and the capital that you're bringing in, I work with LIHTC, right? Because that's one of the biggest ways where I can bring in a lot of equity on the front end and carry very little debt, right? So when I look at that, I have to look at how a community scores. And I have to look, okay, does this have the right scoring to give me the potential to make a competitive application? And I think that just recently on your podcast, you had talked about a QAP and LIHTC credits. That's exactly how this works, right? So we have to look at the community. Can we put forward a competitive application? So if we have political will and their geographic scoring is competitive, then we really have to look at what are some of those other pieces that we need. Because another challenge that we face in northern rural Minnesota is that we don't have the big sack and whack fees that the metro areas do, right? So what are some of those non-capital contributions that can be pulled in and we can leverage with where we're at? Usually it's reduced land, so we can use that value of the land, TIF, tax abatement, other other kind of tools like that, explaining why that's a benefit. We're not trying to take everything that we have, but it's one of those things where it's like we need to have that on the front end to be competitive. So if you can get all three of those things, then you have to get it past council and public hearings and all this other stuff. So it is a tremendous process, and it takes being real in the moment, and it takes being transparent, and it takes thick skin to be told no and to hear a bunch of crazy stories and rhetoric about the who and the what and the sky is falling and these purple people eaters are coming on the bus and all this craziness. But ultimately, if you can have those conversations and you can build that rapport and not give up on those communities and not lose faith and just provide them with the support and keep working at it bite by bite by bite, it will happen. And this was, a prime example of that. 8 years of
8
the whole
years.
process.
I literally talked to somebody yesterday who took 8 years for their entitlements. Again, do nonprofit housing for folks that are at risk of being homeless, or in case they become homeless, they want to have a space for them so that they stay off the streets for their own religious community. So it's just like all these items that you talked about, political will. I tell people all the time, development is a very steep hill to climb. If you want to pick a steeper hill and a heavier rock to push up that hill, it could be really, really draining. And that's why that political ally, even if you're able to just be open and transparent and show your intentions are positive, that can go a really, really long way. So in your situation, you got the political will. You guys already knew that, hey, it could score correctly so that I can potentially be a good applicant for low income housing tax credits. And then you got the city council approval. And then I'm assuming you started engaging the architects and engineers to figure out, hey, how many units can we build here and what might the construction cost be? Now, let's do the construction piece a little bit. How much did you guys anticipate that the whole project will cost to convert the building to housing? And more importantly, in northern rural Minnesota, who was building there? Like, where'd you even find a builder that can know and execute on this plan? So let's start there. How much was it going to cost, and how did you even find a builder?
I love that question because I talk about this all the time. Due to our location up here, call it the Arrowhead of Minnesota. This is a 13,000 square mile region of the great north of Minnesota. It's over 8,320,000 acres of land. We have industry, we have cabins, we have schools, we have everything, but there is this black hole of development. And when we look at, do we have builders? Do we have general contractors? We do, but it's such a niche market. They're more so into the high-end lake homes because we have a ton of those. So to be able to look at the scope of, okay, do we have a general contractor that, one, that has the capacity to do it, 2, has the will to do it, and 3, has the experience with working with some of the requirements that it takes with the Minnesota housing requirements, historic credits, tax credits in general. It really kind of puts us into a really tight spot. We were very fortunate to be able to work with a wonderful company called Frericks Construction out of the Metro, that they specialize in this, and they have been tremendous through this entire process. So thankfully we had them on board. And then the next was our architect, and that was through Urban Works Architecture in, again, Minneapolis. And with them having the experience to work with a historic building and historic credits, that was great too. And then our co-developer was Trellis Co. out of Minneapolis, who, when they were first starting before my time, they had to bring on that co-developer to get that recognition to be like, oh yeah, well, who is this yahoo up here in northern Minnesota that wants to take on a project in International Falls, right? So looking at this collective team and this greater partnership, we really were able to make that happen. And looking at the commitment of not only the general contractor, but all of their subs. I mean, we fought so hard to get locals, but even people from the Iron Range, Virginia, and Hibbing turned down a 2-hour drive, instead had guys coming from Red Wing to International Falls to make this happen. So yes, we're geographically challenged with looking at, okay, who's got the experience, who's got the capacity, who's got the time to be able to do this and do it for, kind of that reduced percentage. Because I've been told before, housing is not built where it's most needed, it's built where it's most profitable. So who would think they could turn a profit in northern Minnesota where there's just cabins? But But thankfully, like I said, we had such a tremendous team that put in their time, their dedication, time away from families, extra time to make this happen. And it really goes to the spirit of people who believe in what we're doing and building affordable housing and the need. And like I say, we just finally kind of wrapped up everything. We had our first move-ins happen last week. We're moving people in this week. I get to be on site tomorrow. I'm so pumped. And looking at this school, it's a 3-story masonry building. And like I said, American classic architecture. And looking at the requirements that we had to do for historic, I mean, we spent millions in windows that we were required by the historic SHPO and MPS that they wanted to have those historic replicas. So those are some of the things where you're excited to have that credit, right? That extra, that equity and that money coming in. But then when you get the shock, like, oh, so we got to do steel replica windows. Oh my, what's that going to cost? And then you look and some of these requirements, it's an incredible building. It's absolutely beautiful. Also, too, it's a masonry building, and having to navigate blowing out some of those walls and taking out the historic boilers, big, huge, wonderful pieces of equipment, having to saw those out, do our MEPs, our mechanical, electric, and plumbing. Some of the challenges with that, making sure our runs were correct, looking at drawings, making sure that we had everything. So can happen, will happen. Let's put it that way. The good old Murphy's Law. And we had plenty of that. I think our original budget was 14, I think, when we were quoted, like $14 million project. And I think at the end of the day, we were sitting at like around 18 million. But again, this was several years going back and forth before we were able to really kick it off the ground. And thankfully, we were able to pull it together and make it a wonderful project. I'd say to anybody who's really looking at development, do not get your heart set on your first rendering. It will change. Value engineering is a real thing. You have to do it. You're not going to like it, but it's kind of like planning a wedding, right? You stress out so much about how like your big day is going to be, and then you get there and you're like, it's perfect. Like you forget everything. And like I said, just being able to see for our grand opening that we just had, seeing some of the faces, we had a whole mix. We had families, we had people in their later years of life that went to school there, that used to teach there, that came in and were like, ooh, looking at how this building just had this fresh breath of new life into it. And they were telling stories and sharing stories, and you could feel that building have a pulse again. Like you could feel that heartbeat in that building with all those people coming in and sensing that joy and that excitement. It was tremendous. It was really tremendous.
This is so sweet. This is such a great story. Let's wrap up the finance piece and get to the final story of you watching that family get into the home, because you just talked about, hey, original budget was 14 million and it went up to 18 million, right? Scarlett, how does it all work? How does the financing all come together? How much tax credits you had to get from the state? How much historic tax credits you had to get to make this project come through? And what kind of debt did you have to put in place to make this deal come through?
This is something that it's a tough animal, right? Financing any sort of affordable housing project. Like I said, I work primarily with LIHTC, and my experience is with the multifamily realm. So a lot of multifamily development gets their start from the LIHTC, or the low income housing tax credit. And a good way to think about it, to those people that aren't really like financy or don't get wild and crazy about the numbers, is that with LIHTC, you're able to bring in, say, like 80% equity and only carry about 20% debt. So when you're putting together your pro forma, and you're looking how to determine early project feasibility, you have to know that the math is going to math. So when you're looking at LIHTC and you want to bring in that 80% equity, a lot of that goes into your QAP and your geographic scoring and see where you're at. So you kind of run this all out and you score yourself. You're like, okay, this is where my construction cost is coming in. This is where I think I could score. And then you have to do your basis, and you have to realize, okay, this is how I would be with my basis points. And if it's in a certain area, I could get a basis boost and qualify for more of this. And looking at how you can shuffle around those different equity sources, and also to the types of debt that are out there. If you're going to carry certain types of loans, and you have to be able to shop your debt, right? You have to shop your debt, and you have to look very closely at your credit pricing. The thing with tax credits is you're awarded X amount, and then you have to syndicate those out, and they'll give you X amount of cents on the dollar. So let's just say it's 86 cents on the dollar, where you sell them those credits and they give you that equity on the front end in return. So you have immediate access to it. So looking at the complexities and the sleepless nights and the headaches that go into your whole pro forma to see if this thing is actually going to match and come into fruition is something that is truly a different animal. And these different sources like home funds, if there's any grants available, what that looks like if you're going to use GMHF, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, and if those sources are actually going to work together. With this specific project, we had the LIHTC, the state federal historic credits.
Was it 9% tax credits or 4% tax
9%.
credits? Got it.
9%.
Okay. So that's how you got to the 80% equity, because these are 90% correct.
And so we looked very closely at that, and we had some special funding from HUD. So we had 27 total units, and then 10 were set aside. So 6 PWD for HPH. And in the world of development, you have to know your acronyms. So HPH is high priority homeless. PWD is persons with disabilities. So we were able to bring in some funding for that, but that added another layer of complexity to that. So we have to make sure that those units, that those residents fit that specific criteria to be able to use that funding. And looking at operating expenses, reserves, what our investor wants to see, how they want to see it, when they want to see it. It's a very unique animal, and it's a big one. And I've thankfully had our partners in that, and my predecessor that was his shtick, like doing the numbers all day. And I'm like, I'm going to cry. I'm going to lose sleep over this. Like, I want to make sure that it's going to work. And we came in almost right in on our 12-month projected construction timeframe. A little bit over. Usually, there's always something, but like I said, our general contractors and our architects were fantastic. They really pushed and were able to get us in time. And like I said, value engineering, get to love it. If you're in development, we had to cut some things that we originally wanted in the project just because, with the timing of everything, that when we got our estimates and how we did that, it was really something that we had to relook at, what we were awarded in credits and what we had to cut. So some of those things were unfortunate, but it is the nature of construction. It's what we have to deal with.
Yeah. And I think for people that are listening for the first time and they don't understand what low income housing tax credits, I want to make sure that people understand there's 4% tax credits and there's 9% tax credits, which are much more competitive, hence why it's a higher value. And with a 4% tax credit, I mean, you might be getting 30 to 40% equity. With a 9% tax credit, you might be getting 70, 80% equity. So the amount of debt you require to make the whole deal work goes down significantly. And that might affect if the math will math at the end of the day, because you still have to pay and service the debt. And when Scarlett was talking about, hey, we have to syndicate the tax credits, that just means that just because you got these tax credits, you got to go sell them now for 85, 86 cents on the dollar. You don't just get these credits and like, oh, let me just hold on to them. You got to turn them into capital to pay your contractors, pay your bills, to build the building. So I want to make sure people understood that really, really clearly, because now I understand. I mean, once you got 80% equity, the debt was much easier if they know that 20% is just debt. So Scarlett, you got this project built. I believe you said it was 27 units, right, for this project. Tell us what it was like, that family walking in to see their home for the first time. Tell us a little bit about that story.
Oh, I remember what it was like when I was with my parents and we went to go look at the trailer, right? The used trailer at Frontier Homes in Bemidji. And walking in the door, I'm like, oh my God, I can run. What is this? This is brand new, because it was brand new to me. It was something completely different. And it was something that I thought was out of reach for us. And when I was at the grand opening and we were kind of shuffling people through like our showcase units that we had, I got word where they're like, Scarlett, you need to come down here. What's happening? What happened? Is there a problem? And they're like, no. One of the families that was selected is actually here, and they're seeing their unit for the first time. And I was in heels. I flew down the stairs. I'm like a complete nut. I'm like, oh gosh, where are they? And I looked and I watched, and I get emotional thinking about it. There was this family, this man, his wife, and their 4 kids, and they were awarded a 4-bedroom unit on the 2nd floor. I walked in and they were beaming and they had their phones out and they were recording, and they're like, look at this. This is so-and-so's bedroom. We can put bunk beds in here, and we can have this. We're going to have the TV and the couch, and I'm so excited. Like, you could feel the room was electric with passion. And I was so moved. And I looked at the other people in the room that were touring this, and it was infectious. It was this powerful moment where they were living it. They were living that key pivotal moment that so many people dream of, but few get to experience. That was their moment. And I had the complete honor and privilege to be there. I was gobsmacked. I was excited. I introduced myself and I'm like, I'm so excited for you. And just hearing them and hearing their story, and like, we were praying for this. We were looking for this. We were hoping for this. And then we got the call and now we're here and we're sending videos to our in-laws because they're so excited. And I'm like, you have to come with me. And I wrangled them and I was like, think with me. I'm like, now your 4 kids can go right across the hall into the community room and they can do movie night and they can do game night and they can use the kitchen in the community room for like pizzas and hang out with friends and birthday parties. And then the library is like right across from their unit. And we were talking about like, how cool is it? Your kids have a sense of everything right here. You and your kids are home. And like, I'm allowed to experience this. How wild is this? Like, and it was such a powerful moment. We had the local TV station there and they were interviewed. We were just recently told that a news station out of Duluth, who the reporter is originally from International Falls, wants to come in and interview this family and take a tour of the building. And just looking at how it's come full circle, where I literally got to see that family react and watch them in one of the most pivotal moments of their life. And those kids have the opportunity to go through school this year and have that housing it was just powerful. It was incredibly powerful. Looking at how many units that we've rented up already and knowing that people are getting a whole new opportunity. It's a brand new door in so many ways, right? It's a brand new emotional door. It's a brand new personal door. It's a brand new front door for them and the stage of life that they're in. It's just so incredible. It's incredible what political will and partnership and passion can do to help change the minds that, everybody is just walking each other home when we think about life in the grand scheme of things. And to be able to do that with compassion and understanding and without judgment is really a tremendous feat. And I look at what we're able to do, and for those people that are involved in housing and advocate for affordable housing, it's really one of those things that it's more financially feasible. There should be no stigma about somebody having a basic human right to have heat, to have a roof over their head, to be able to live comfortably and not be penalized, if they're making more. And that's what's so wonderful about our project. Like, if you qualify, you're in. But if you decide to further your education or you get a better job, you're not going to be kicked out. It's meant to give you that hand up instead of that handout. So you can really just have the human opportunity to live and hopefully to thrive. And I hope to continue that for as long as I'm willing, as long as, my organization has me. It's so cool. It gives me the top to my tank that I need. And just seeing how the kids were so excited looking in their bedrooms, because I remember having that myself, and to watch it from the outside was a powerful moment. It really was.
I feel so wholesome for you and your team. And, I for those that are listening, I shed some tears just listening to the story. And I think for all of you out there right now that are listening to this podcast, not only for inspiration, but for tactical advice, you just learned from Scarlet and her team how to put together a deal, how to get the financing into place, and how to ultimately walk that family into that apartment and watch their lives get changed forever. And these are going to be hard problems. And what will probably help you, if you're listening, is imagining you helping that family when they walk through that door for the first time. Because the only reason I keep going on this podcast and in development is because I am so focused on helping that one family, that one person, because that person used to be my mom. And had no one been out there like Scarlet that fought tooth and nail to put and make these projects come to life, I would have never had the home I grew up in. And that's why I'm so grateful for people like you, Scarlet. When I first got on that Zoom with you and I heard your story, I was blown away, sincerely. And I am so grateful and honestly, it's refreshing to hear that there are people with great hearts like yourself that are out here changing lives. And who knows, one of those kids probably might cure cancer someday. And that's what's so cool about it, because you just gave them a chance at a life with dignity and living in a home that they can be really, really proud of. I'm so glad that you came on a podcast today, Scarlet. I cannot thank you enough. I'm so grateful for you. And I want to end this podcast with one more question for you. And this is a question I ask everybody on the podcast. Scarlett, why do you think affordable housing, particularly the lack of supply of affordable housing, is just so hard to solve for?
I honestly believe that the lack of affordable housing and why it's so hard to try to even identify, plan for, and kind of map out how you're going to solve that is that it stems down at the crux of it, it's a human issue. If I had to look at it, it's like when you deal with NIMBY-ism and the power of NIMBY-ism, you can't make anything happen. And why is NIMBY-ism a thing? It's a human thing, and it stems from fear. And when we think back about how our first thought might be of affordable housing, a lot of people jump right to that stigma, right? It's those people, it's that building, it's that part of town, it's that unwanted piece. And people really forget the human component that's there. There's a lot of people that, if you really listen to their story, about 90% of everybody that you know has had one instance that they were in poverty, right? Like you might hear it from people like, yeah, when we were starting out and we were first married, we were living in my parents' basement. Well, guess what? You were roughing it. You didn't have a place to go, so you made do with what you got. And I think that it's a very human component. We have to look at it. We have to work with people through their fears. We have to validate people that have those fears, but it's human because there's ways to raise capital. There's ways to work with zoning. There's ways to do this. But what stands in the way of that? It's people, and it's the emotion that is behind a lot of those people that put up the roadblocks to housing, in my mind. So we need to remember that we're all human and work together with that to try to dispel some of those fears and just keep working and fighting that good fight that does amazing things for amazing people that exist everywhere.
Yeah, well, and it takes people with a big heart like yourself, Scarlett, to win over this people problem. And this is such a great podcast episode. It's one of my all-time favorites, Scarlett. And I cannot wait to bring you back on to the podcast to hear more about your next project because I feel so good right now. This podcast has allowed me to bring on amazing people, highlight the stories. Thank you for what you do because seriously, without people like you, I would never have the home I grew up in. And I'm so grateful for that. And I'm so confident your parents are so proud of what you've done. When your kids listen to this podcast someday, they're going to be like, that's my mom. She did things. And just to watch your story and listen to your story, how you used to live in that part of town and now just busting that myth completely. Thank you so much for helping me to share the information, how to be successful in affordable housing, for inspiring so many other people to get into this space. I am absolutely thrilled. Thank you so much, Scarlett. Hey, Scarlett, if people want to find out more about you or learn more about your company's mission, where can they find out more about you?
And thank you, Ken, for having the courage to reach out. It's that power of people and it's that power of connection. So humbled and very appreciative of you reaching out to give us this opportunity to connect. And if people are out there and they're curious to connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm there. Don't be a stranger, shoot me a message. Let me know that you don't want to know about my car's extended warranty or anything crazy like that. And I'm always happy to converse. I'm happy to share. We go further together than we do on our own. So it's the power of network and the power of teams. You can find me on LinkedIn. Also, if you're curious about the organization that I work for, it is a nonprofit. It is called Kootaska Community Action. Kootaska, Itasca County, and Koochiching County. And we are based here in Grand Rapids, and we have a satellite office up in International Falls. And we do work all across the Arrowhead. I love connecting with people. I love people, and I love working hard and being competitive for a greater good. So if you're like me and you want to team up, you want to have coffee or virtual coffee, come find me.
Yes, please make sure you follow her on LinkedIn and reach out to her because she has a wealth of information that will probably, and I know for a fact, will change your life. So, Scarlett, thank you so much. And we are out.